In 1891, a lighthouse keeper named Edmund Thorne posed for what should have been an ordinary portrait. But when people looked closely at the photograph, they noticed something terrifying about his eyes, something that would haunt everyone who saw it and lead to one of the most chilling mysteries in maritime history. The photograph was discovered in 2003 by historian Margaret Wells while she was researching lighthouse records at the Maritime Historical Society in Maine. She was looking through old documents about keeper disappearances when she found a manila envelope marked with Thorne's name. Inside was a single photograph and a collection of journal entries that would change everything she thought she knew about lighthouse keeping. The portrait showed Thorne standing beside his lighthouse on a rocky cliff. He wore the standard keeper's uniform of dark wool and brass buttons. His beard was neatly trimmed and his hands rested calmly at his sides. At first glance, it seemed like any other occupational photograph from the late 1800s, but Margaret noticed something deeply unsettling about his eyes. They appeared to be looking in two different directions at once, not crossed or lazy, but as if each eye was focused on something completely separate. The left eye stared straight ahead at the camera with normal human awareness, while the right eye seemed to be looking over the photographer's shoulder at something invisible to others. Margaret had seen many old photographs with technical flaws, but this was different. The eyes looked intentionally misaligned, as if Thorne was watching two completely different worlds simultaneously. She decided to research Thorne's background more thoroughly. According to the Lighthouse Commission records, Edmund Thorne had been appointed to Black Rock Light Station in September 1890. He was 34 years old, unmarried, and had no living family members. His previous job was as a ship's navigator for merchant vessels, which made him well qualified for the isolated work of lighthouse keeping. The commission noted that he was reliable, punctual, and had excellent vision, which was essential for spotting ships in dangerous waters. But Margaret found something unusual in the employment records. Thorne's application mentioned that he had specifically requested to work completely alone at the lighthouse. Most lighthouse keepers preferred to have assistants, especially during the harsh winter months when storms could last for weeks. Thorne insisted he needed no help and could manage all duties by himself. The commission granted his unusual request, noting his extensive experience and strong references from previous employers. The first journal entry was dated October 15, 1890, just 1 month after Thorne began his duties. In neat, careful handwriting, he described his daily routine of maintaining the light, checking the weather conditions, and recording ship movements in the official logbook. Everything seemed perfectly normal until Margaret read an entry from November 3rd. Thorne wrote about seeing ships that weren't actually there. He would spot vessels approaching the rocky coastline in the distance and would immediately light the warning beacon to guide them away from danger. But when he looked again through his telescope, he would realize that the ocean was completely empty. At first, he blamed these incidents on fog and poor visibility conditions, but the phantom ships began appearing even on clear nights when the moon was bright and the water was perfectly calm. By December, the journal entries became much more disturbing and detailed. Thorne described feeling constantly watched while he performed his duties. He wrote about dark shadows moving past the lighthouse windows when he was alone inside the building. He mentioned hearing voices calling his name from the rocks below, but when he rushed outside to look, no one was ever there. The complete isolation was clearly affecting his mental state, but he consistently refused to request an assistant or take leave. Margaret found medical records from the nearby town of Millfield. In January 1891, Thorne had visited Dr. Samuel Hayes, complaining of severe headaches and unusual vision problems. The doctor's detailed notes described Thorne as extremely agitated and claiming that he could see things that other people could not see. Dr. Hayes prescribed complete rest and strongly suggested that Thorne take an extended leave of absence from his lighthouse duties. But Thorne never followed the doctor's professional advice. Instead, he returned immediately to the lighthouse and continued his work with even more dedication than before. His journal entries from February and March showed a man slowly losing his grip on reality. He wrote about having long conversations with people who visited him late at night, though the lighthouse was only accessible by boat during high tide and no boats had been officially recorded as visiting Black Rock Light Station. The entries described these mysterious visitors in great detail. They were always sailors dressed in old-fashioned clothing from decades past. They spoke about ships that had wrecked on the treacherous rocks long before Thorne's arrival. According to his writings, these ghostly visitors shared stories about their deaths and warned him about the dangerous nature of his location. The most chilling entry was dated April 8, 1891. Thorne described a particular visitor who came to the lighthouse during a terrible storm that lasted 3 days. The man was dressed in rotting sailor's clothes and spoke about ships that had wrecked on the rocks decades before the lighthouse was even built. The visitor told Thorne that the lighthouse had been constructed on a cursed spot where many sailors had died violent deaths, and that their angry spirits were furious about the light that now warned ships away from their eternal resting place. Thorne wrote that this mysterious visitor showed him a secret ritual for seeing the spirit world. He described the process in disturbing detail. The ritual involved staring at his own reflection in a broken mirror while speaking the names of all the drowned sailors who had died on those rocks. The visitor had somehow provided him with a complete list of names, dates, and details about each death. After performing this strange ritual multiple times, Thorne claimed he had developed the ability to see both the living world and the world of the dead at the same time. His left eye could see reality as it normally appeared to living people, while his right eye showed him the spirits that constantly haunted the rocky coastline. He wrote that dozens of ghostly figures wandered the area both day and night, reliving their final moments over and over again. Margaret realized this explained the bizarre appearance of Thorne's eyes in the photograph. If he truly believed he was seeing 2 different worlds simultaneously, he might have been trying to focus on both realms when the picture was taken. This would account for the strange misalignment that made viewers so uncomfortable. The journal entries from summer 1891 became increasingly erratic and difficult to read. Thorne's handwriting grew sloppy and rushed. He wrote about regular conversations with the dead sailors who had apparently accepted him as their ally. They taught him about the history of the area and showed him visions of future shipwrecks that he could prevent by timing his warning lights perfectly. He began to believe that his role as lighthouse keeper was actually a sacred duty to both the living and the dead. He wrote about coordinating with the spirits to protect modern sailors while also helping the ghostly figures find peace. This dual responsibility required him to constantly watch both worlds, which explained his increasingly strange behavior and appearance. Margaret discovered more disturbing details in Thorne's later entries. He wrote about learning the names and stories of every sailor who had died near Black Rock Point. The spirits would visit him nightly and share their memories of drowning in the cold waters. Thorne began keeping a separate journal dedicated entirely to recording these stories, creating a detailed record of maritime deaths that had never been officially documented. The final journal entry was dated September 12, 1891, the same day the mysterious photograph was taken. Thorne wrote that a photographer named Charles Brennan had arrived to document the lighthouse for the Maritime Commission's annual report. He was extremely excited to have the portrait taken because he wanted to create permanent proof that he could see things others could not. He wrote that the camera would somehow capture his unique ability to watch both worlds at once. But something went terribly wrong during the photo session. Margaret found a detailed letter from photographer Charles Brennan addressed to the Maritime Commission. Brennan described Thorne as acting very strangely during the entire portrait session. Thorne kept talking to people who weren't visible and insisted that Brennan photograph him while he was actively watching the spirits around them. Brennan wrote that Thorne's behavior made him extremely uncomfortable. The lighthouse keeper would suddenly turn his head to look at empty spaces and nod as if responding to conversations that Brennan could not hear. Thorne also insisted on positioning himself in a specific spot where he claimed he could see the most spirits clearly. When Brennan developed the photograph back in his studio, he was deeply disturbed by Thorne's expression and the unnatural way his eyes seemed to be looking in completely different directions. But what frightened him most was what he discovered in the background of the image. Behind Thorne, barely visible in the shadows near the lighthouse, were what appeared to be the faint outlines of several human figures standing in a group. Brennan initially thought these shapes were simply tricks of light and shadow, but the more he studied the photograph, the more convinced he became that he had somehow captured images of actual people. The figures appeared to be wearing old-fashioned sailor clothing and seemed to be watching both Thorne and the camera with great interest. When Brennan returned to Black Rock Light Station 2 days later to deliver the finished photograph, he found the lighthouse completely abandoned. Thorne's personal belongings were still neatly arranged in his quarters, and the warning light was still burning brightly, but the keeper was nowhere to be found. A thorough search of the rocky coastline revealed absolutely no trace of him. The Maritime Commission assumed he had fallen from the cliffs during a storm, but his body was never recovered despite extensive efforts. Margaret studied the original photograph under a powerful magnifying glass and confirmed what Brennan had described in his letter. In the shadows behind Thorne, she could clearly make out several ghostly figures that seemed to be watching him with approval. The images were extremely faint and might have been dismissed as natural shadows, but their human shapes and poses were unmistakable to anyone who looked carefully. She decided to research the complete history of Black Rock Point and discovered that Thorne's claims about the cursed location might have been based on real events. Between 1847 and 1889, at least 12 merchant ships had wrecked on the treacherous rocks below the lighthouse's current location. More than 40 sailors had died in those cold waters before the lighthouse was built to warn approaching ships away from the dangerous coastline. The Lighthouse Commission had specifically chosen this location because so many ships had been lost there. They wanted to prevent future tragedies by placing a powerful warning light on the highest point of the rocky cliff. But according to local legends that Margaret uncovered in old newspapers, the families of the drowned sailors had strongly protested the lighthouse construction, claiming it would disturb the spirits of their loved ones who had died there. Margaret also found newspaper reports from late 1891 describing strange incidents at other lighthouses along the Maine coast after Thorne's mysterious disappearance. Several keepers reported seeing a man matching Thorne's description walking along the shoreline at night during storms. These sightings always occurred during the worst weather, and the mysterious figure seemed to be actively warning ships away from dangerous rocks by waving lanterns and shouting warnings. One keeper claimed he had actually spoken with the ghostly figure during a particularly severe storm. The apparition identified himself as Edmund Thorne and said he was working with other spirits to protect sailors from meeting the same fate he had witnessed during his time at Black Rock Light. According to this account, Thorne had somehow become a guardian spirit himself, using his unique ability to see both worlds to prevent future shipwrecks along the entire coastline. Other lighthouse keepers reported similar encounters over the following years. The ghostly figure of Thorne was always described as having the same unsettling eyes that seemed to look in two directions at once. Witnesses said he appeared to be constantly watching for both approaching ships and invisible spirits that only he could see. The photograph remains in the Maritime Historical Society's collection today, though it's rarely displayed due to its deeply disturbing nature. Visitors who have seen it report feeling extremely uneasy, as if Thorne's mismatched gaze is somehow still actively watching them across time. Some visitors claim they can see the shadowy figures in the background moving slightly when they're not looking directly at the image. Margaret's extensive research concluded that Edmund Thorne had likely suffered a complete mental breakdown, brought on by extreme isolation and the psychological stress of his demanding duties. The phantom ships and spirit visitors were probably elaborate hallucinations caused by his rapidly deteriorating mental state. But she could never adequately explain the strange appearance of his eyes in the photograph or the ghostly figures clearly visible in the background. The mystery of what actually happened to Edmund Thorne remains completely unsolved to this day. Did he simply fall victim to madness and accidentally fall from the cliffs during a storm, or did something genuinely supernatural occur at Black Rock Light Station? The haunting photograph suggests that whatever Thorne experienced was somehow real enough to be permanently captured on film. Today, Black Rock Light Station is fully automated and no longer requires a human keeper, but local fishermen still report strange lights sometimes appearing in the lighthouse windows on stormy nights, even though the building has been officially sealed for decades. They say if you look very carefully at those mysterious lights, you might see a figure with mismatched eyes still keeping his eternal watch over the dangerous waters, protecting both the living and the dead. The truth about Edmund Thorne and his haunting photograph may never be fully understood or explained. But one thing is absolutely certain in this chilling tale. Sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are found in the things we think we see, captured forever in a single, deeply unsettling image that refuses to let us look away. What do you think really happened to the lighthouse keeper with the strange eyes? Share your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling historical mysteries that will keep you awake at night wondering what's really watching you.